This is the CIRB order. Here's what I'm supposed to do. I'm expected to say, stand down. I'm expected to direct you to go back to work. I'm expected to end this strike. When this strike would end. I said it clearly then, and I will say it clearly now. This strike will end when we get a collective agreement that works for our members.
Yes, folks, that was Canadian Union for Public Employees President Mark Hancock, who then did secure such an agreement. It looks like you do love to see that, David. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. No, I think a perfect way to start things off.
Yeah, there's a good piece by Jeremy Apple, Appel, actually, where he corrected me on his pronunciation, which I need to internalize that. But flight attendants won't let Air Canada profit from unpaid labor. This crazy thing where, and you hear about this in the context of like Sarah Nelson and the flight attendants here in the States, that you're only paid for the time that you're in the air. So all the time sitting around you do is, insane.
I mean, a lot of like American, I guess Canadian capitalism as well, over the past few years has been just trying to find ways to not pay people for productive activities like that. Like you have to have people at the airport to be able to fly these things and operate safely. And that is actually labor. That's a part of the job.
And we need to get these things to shareholders, because even though that might be a public employee union, the Air Canada has been private for some time. They just are still represented by that union. But good to see union flex its muscles and come through with a victory. They threatened that guy with jail time because the Canada's sort of like, I guess their equivalent to the NLRB said, you got to get back to work. And turns out, when you call that bluff, like, does Mark Carney really want to jail a union leader right now?
Yeah. Probably
it's
not.
Awesome.
No, probably not. No, but it's also like those are the kind of fights that we have to be engaging in and having a willingness to take these things on. I mean, we're going to be talking a little bit about willingness to face police arrest when it comes to the quorum break and the now return that happened in Texas, and how probably should have lasted a little bit longer because the forces that we're up against. One, as everybody knows, aren't willing to play by the rules. And the only way that we're going to beat them is by standing strongly and united. But we got a full show. Let's introduce the program before we get into all of that. We got another big DSA jam here. We're going to be sharing a conversation we had with Kelsea Bond, who is running for city council in Atlanta. We talk about Southern socialism, the campaign there, how people can get involved, and I think some interesting stuff about the importance of being rooted in a political and cultural tradition as well. We also are going to be joined by Cerena and Ella, two recently elected members of the NPC of the Democratic Socialists of America. And we're talking a little bit about what the future of that organization and movement is going to look like, and also the importance of getting involved. Really excited to have all three of those folks on the program.
And that interview was conducted before they had been selected to the NPC. So I like to think that gave them a little bit of a left reckoning bump.
100%. People knew that, I don't know, the real power players behind the scene. Yeah,
exactly.
We're having those conversations. It's all coded. It's all coded. Friends. No, and then obviously we will be talking a little bit more about what's going on here in Texas with this redistricting fight, where the Democrats have returned to the state, what that means, what it represents, and sort of what this whole fight is about and its consequences for not just folks in Texas, but all across the country coming up. Plenty more, obviously, in the post game as well.
in the post game, we'll be getting into the new publication that's going to save liberalism, which is pretty exciting.
It's very exciting, and they've already shown themselves to be tremendous experts on the history of, global capitalism. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Much more. Matt, I know we're going to talk about this Bolivia election, but I do just want to give you the opportunity as our resident anti-Zionist to talk a little bit about this arrest or non-arrest, I guess, of this Israeli official who was able to flee the country after getting wrapped up in an investigation for literal pedophilia. And just, I don't know how ironic it is in this country that you have a president of this country who has, used kind of threats to the general public, imagined threats to the general public to kind of justify all kinds of horror and terror on the streets of this country with these mass deportations. Seeing his administration play a role in defending and protecting this guy who's been enabling a genocide, but also engaged in some pretty heinous activities in this country.
I'm actually not super.
Oh, yeah, well, there we go. For people who haven't followed this story, this is somebody who has been investigated, was allowed to leave the country, was allowed to leave the country with the interference of the Trump administration. Somebody who's very close to the Netanyahu government. I don't know. Plenty more to look into there. Just truly egregious thing that that happened over the weekend.
Yeah, I know Sagar over at Breaking Points has had some information on this. It's the sort of thing where to back up, my take on the Epstein stuff is sort of that when it comes to solidifying a sort of cross-Atlantic Zionist alliance, those sorts of say blackmail or web creation, social networking is a nice to have, not a need to have. I think, the different military considerations and larger financial considerations are probably more determinative than the using communal sex crimes to solidify your bonds of trust with each other. But there's a lot of it doesn't look good when this stuff keeps happening. And also, Israel is known for hosting a large number of sexual abusers, particularly people going after underage children, they're hosting them, and people fleeing to Israel as a sort of refuge for that. It's gross. It's pretty disgusting stuff.
No, I mean, totally. And yeah, I mean, people should definitely check out some of the reporting on it because it's pretty interesting. And we have a lot to get to today, but figured we couldn't allow this to be covered up on this program. But Matt, I mean, we got to talk about what happened in Bolivia. And I think, I'll appreciate you helping us out with a kind of a breakdown and update of what's happened over the past few years there. But for folks who have maybe jumped on to Left Reckoning later, we've been covering Bolivia and Bolivian politics on this program for years. Anyways, I mean, I don't want to take away your opportunity to talk about this here, but this is something that we've been covering a lot, and there were very, very disappointing elections that happened over the weekend. But Matt, take us away.
Yeah, I mean, just to back up on some of the positives of the EVO and movement for socialism, like I said, this is the first election that EVO's not running since 2002, even though he wants to be. There's a good piece in Catalyst from 2020, The Fall of Evo Morales, I believe that is the title. Yeah, The Fall of Evo Morales. I mean, some positives for folks who haven't been following this. Basically, the state getting much more involved in redistribution and social support for vulnerable populations, particularly extending support and rights to indigenous folks. This article goes out of the way to emphasize that it was a historically stable period this last couple decades for Bolivia, despite, even the coup in 2019 and the brief period. But redistributing resources from the gas industry, funding social programs, and this is something that we talk about with Brazil too, and the sort of how determinative commodity prices can be towards some of these things, but ultimately improved working masses livelihoods, and then there was the coup attempt, which was horrible. The government that was in power, the coup government, had massive negative effects, basically doing Doge-style slashes to the state while they were in power, and then a lot of we've covered this even on this program, the reassertion of the social movement power to say, actually, we need to get elections again. We don't honor this coup government, and that's how Arce, won 4 years ago.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, and I mean, just like talking about that coup for a second. Like one thing I think is really important to understand about Bolivia is it's a country with a massive indigenous population that has historically been kind of pushed out of politics. As it is a country that has tremendous natural resources, and that is a population that has been kind of excluded from the economic opportunities in that country. So Evo Morales' movement has been a movement of the poor, but also of building up the power for indigenous people in Bolivia. And going back to the coup, I mean, not only was there the kind of Doge stuff and the neoliberalism, I mean, there was horrendous assaults on those communities as well. I mean, we played videos of people kind of being, grabbed and having their hair cut in the middle of the street. I don't know if you remember, this was a few years back, as the coup was ongoing. And one of the kind of fundamental aspects of the coup was the fact that it allowed not only for Mas and Evo Morales to kind of be deposed, but it allowed for this kind of far-right coalition that was representative of absolutely nobody to come into power and try to undermine all of the work of Mas and Evo Morales. Yeah, you can put this up.
Here's Janina Nez with a giant Bible after the coup, saying
una Biblia, al parecer,
the Biblia,
es en la que se va a juramentar.
Basically saying we've come to remove the I'll never forget this language. I think she tweeted it out. Satanicos indigenas, satanic indigenous people. In 2019, that is that government came to power talking like that.
Yeah, and for many years, Morales and Mas and what's happened in Bolivia has been a kind of standard of like left-wing politics, particularly in the Americas, but it's also served as a significant source of inspiration in the U.S. Because, again, this is a country, with a sordid political history that had been able to build up a movement of working class people and indigenous folks to try and take power, and were able to do tremendous things when it came to alleviating poverty in the country, to extending rights, and building, plurinationality in the country as well. Right, so a lot of successes and very important lessons to take from Mas. It was also, I think, a very clear moment when you saw what people would be willing to take on, a pro-American imperialist line. I remember somebody like David Packman, who, as the coup was ongoing, jumped in with all of the worst reactionary right-wingers to attack Evo Morales and Mas and the political movement, something that has now been completely debunked, by the way, at this point, that there was election fraud back in that election. It was something that was also widely available at the time. It was something used by the OAS, which is like a reactionary anti-democratic organization, to try to undermine the popular project in Bolivia. Right. So it was a really telling moment. This is just something that, getting into some of the results here, why this is such an important context and an important country, and in many ways such a devastating and historic defeat.
David, in the 2019, after Janina Nez got into power, their diplomatic ties were reestablished with two countries. One was America. Can you guess what the other country was?
I couldn't imagine it's a country named Israel.
It was our good friends over at Israel.
Yeah,
so,
who
have some Satanicos indigenos they're dealing with as well.
So anyways, bringing us up to closer today, you have, Mas returns to power under Arce, who in many ways was a prodigy of Evo Morales, or at least was seen as it. Now, he did come from a different kind of class and social background, somebody who came from a more middle class, educated background than somebody like Evo Morales. And his presidency has been disappointing, to say the least. We've covered a little bit on this program, but it has been one that has not been as transformative, obviously, as the original years of the Mas. Though many people thought he might run again, he did not run in this election. Let's just pull up the results here, and we can get into some of the reasons why. But for anybody who hasn't been following this, it was a historic defeat. Not only did Mas lose, Mas got something like just a little bit over 3%. A little bit over 3%, and which meant that they barely, by the skin of their teeth, prevented the party from being completely dissolved, right? They get to maintain their status as a political party, but if you don't hit that 3% threshold, you don't get the same ballot access, all this kind of stuff. So not only is it a defeat, Mas is nowhere to be seen here. Now you see those two parties at the top. These are a centrist, by kind of general standards, and a right-wing movement. The first one who came in with around 32% was Rodrigo Paz, and he kind of was a dark horse, somebody who people didn't expect to win, but had been able to sort of pull ahead in the past few weeks. And we also have a conservative leader here, Jorge Quiroga, who got around 27%. And they will go out into a runoff in October. But again, you can see here that the left, as far as we know it and understand it, is nowhere near power. Now, there is something to note here.
Right, because just to note that the third place is not even left two. That's a center right, and the closest left-wing candidate is Andronico Rodriguez at 7.8%.
Yes. Noting that, and then also, if you can see there, the null votes. Null means the ballots are spoiled. That's around 18%. I believe it's 18.4% by some of the final counts. It could probably be higher, when everything is tabulated. Now, why are people not casting their ballots here? It was because that was something that Evo Morales had requested for people to do in protest of this election. Evo Morales had been sort of pushed out by Mas, wasn't on the ballot there. They have not been able to come to a kind of solution as to who should lead the party. So you can still see here that despite the fact that Mas and the left is no longer dominant, as they have been, they still have a representation. There still are enough people who are going to, spoil their ballots in favor of this political organization. So this is the kind of the crisis here. Is that you still have representation, you still have organization of this political moment and movement, but it is nowhere near organized or close to power. You go down a little bit further, Matt, we can get into some of the backstory here. Because over the past few years, and there's a really wonderful piece in Jackman that people should read, Is This the End of Mas? By Olivia Aguijo Stiles. Apologize if I pronounce it incorrectly. For the past few years, the Mas party bases have been engulfed in a bitter and prolonged divisions between Vistas and Arcista factions. The former supports Morales, and the latter the current president, Luis Arce, who Morales had nominated as his successor. This dispute has led to political deadlock, with Avista representatives blocking the Arce administration's legislation related to financial spending, worsening the economic picture. And to give a little bit further context here, Renovation in Bolivia, which was in the New Left Review just a couple years ago by Jeffrey Weber, the prevailing view within the Arce cabinet is that the era of transformation has come to an end. Instead, the current period demands a defensive administrative posture at best, the consolidation of previous gains, and more challenging material conditions. The aim is to prioritize political stability and solely reactivate the project of neo-developmental capitalist modernizations. This is likely to be the Arce only horizon of possibility in the absence of serious pressure from social movements, whose supporters have been isolated within the government, controlling only the ministries of education and rural culture and development. So yes, what we are getting here is that since Arce has come into power, there has been a kind of fragmentation within Mas. And there's a bit that's a little bit more complicated than I think the kind of general narrative here is that, like, oh, Evo Morales, and we can pull this down now, man, like Evo Morales, should have just like named a successor and supported them. I think that's certainly part of the picture, but there's also a kind of like mass politics aspect here too, where a certain section of the party that was a little bit more conciliatory and sort of felt that the kind of political wins, the economic changes that the country had experienced were sort of putting them into a defensive posture. That created a significant crisis and conflict, one with Evo Morales, but also with a lot of Morales' base, particularly indigenous members of MAS and the union movement. Neither of those have disappeared or dissipated. And this is the kind of the crisis, I think, of this moment, where like there still is a kind of motivated and mobilized base of around MAS, but there has been such severe and significant fragmentation across that political organization and party that it doesn't allow them to kind of articulate themselves on the national scene. And yeah, I think there certainly is a lot of this that is probably personality driven. I don't think that there's any way you can look about this, even if it's justified. Let's even operate under that kind of understanding that it's completely justified. Nobody but Morales can keep the flame alive, carry the torch forward, whatever analogy you want to use here. Well, not developing that or figuring something like that out now has put them into this kind of crisis, where despite the multiple attempts, Morales just doesn't seem like he's going to be able to get on the ballot again to be president, which means if he was the only one who could sort of maintain and mobilize this movement, it seems like he can't anymore. It puts him in this kind of further crisis, and it's devastating because in many ways, what had been built up with MAS as a political movement was inspiring, because despite the attempt by the U.S. and other kind of malign actors to overthrow and overwhelm and destroy this movement, it was able to maintain itself. As the coup government comes into power in Bolivia, you see continued mass mobilizations and fighting, for democracy in that country that were significant enough that it only took a few years for the coup mongers to be completely pushed out of power. And that's something that only happens when you build up and have tremendous trust and mobilization and organization in your movements. And look, again, it's not eradicated in the country, but it's severely weakened. And a lot of this has come through personality splits, tactical decisions, weakness of party apparatus. And there's a lot of lessons that I think will have to be taken from it. We've upheld the Bolivian model many times on this program. So I think that it's only our responsibility to be the first ones to say it needs to be investigated more and understood better what went wrong and how could have been prevented.
Yeah, I mean, just because the problem of succession is one of the hardest things, it seems like, for any politics, regardless of ideology, to accomplish, doesn't mean it's not a failure when it's not, successfully undertaken. And I do think AMLO and Scheinbaum point to, well, this is solvable. Mm-hmm. These sorts of things are solvable. And there's the other element of, it almost feels like how America was sick of the New Deal after FDR died, and there was nobody really to bring that up or to revitalize that for a whole while. Like, you have all the social movements, which, in this Fall of Evo Morales piece in Catalyst, talks about, you basically neuter them if they have to be supportive of the current administration. And then and it's, I think, fascinating that they were strong enough to basically remove the coup government 4 or 5 years ago. But ultimately, you can't just be a defensive sort of posture, and those results speak for themselves. I mean, 3%, even if all those 18% no votes voted, you still would have been in severe trouble for the runoff.
I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, it was something that happens when you start to have a lack of trust, and I think this is one thing that I think left-wing governments across the globe, really have to internalize too, is that there is no you can think that if I just make these kind of conciliations to the ruling class, this is what happens with Lula, right? Not just in his more transformative term, right, where he did try to make these kind of deals with Brazilian capital. They still hated him. They still thought he was the devil and a dangerous revolutionary who needed to be defeated. That's why they pushed the coup against him. This return for Lula has been, frankly, extremely disappointing as well. And again, has it provided him with many favors from the ruling class in Brazil? No. This is another example of that. You can't ever Just think that, like, they're going to respect the ruling class is going to just be like, oh, you know what, they've given us a fair shake on this or that. Like, it has to be a 100% fight for your base and working class people. And we'll see how it goes with Scheinbaum. I mean, Scheinbaum is going to have a lot of challenges in the near future. Less so from like having a bad relationship with AMLO, right? Despite all the claims that AMLO is going to be a kind of second president and not allowed
dictator.
To govern. Yeah. All that nonsense. He's seems to be pretty happy writing his book back in Tabasco. And Scheinbaum has, shown a tremendous skill, I think, in these first few months to close to a year now of presidency. But she's going to have a lot to on her plate with dealing with a party like Morena, which is so broad that I think that there's a lot of questions about how long lasting it's going to be. Now, again, winning, setting a good example, having your party be associated with these kind of things, like it is in Mexico with poverty alleviation, just like it was, like MAS was in Bolivia for so long, will go a long way. But these are the fundamental questions that we have as we build our movement, and this is the time to really be considering those out of power as we're trying to build alternatives, which is why I think we actually have some really great guests to speak about that. In a little bit, we're going to jump over to a conversation with Kelsea Bond, who's running for city council in Atlanta. Really exciting campaign. There's a link below for you to get more information to potentially get involved. And then really wonderful speaking with Cerena and Ella about DSA and what's next for it. So we'll jump over to all those. I did just want to remind folks, if you like this program, if you support it, if you want to keep it, continue, support us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Not only does that help support us, you also get the entire show ad-free. You get the post-game immediately after, where Matt and I hang out, take your questions, talk about some things we're not able to get into the main show. And also you get these Sunday shows. And the Sunday shows are always a hell of a lot of fun. In fact, many people, that's their favorite thing that we do. I tend to agree. I think the Sunday shows are always really exciting and informative, and we're able to, again, have the kind of political conversations that we're not able to do on the public side. So consider supporting us at patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to all of that and, to get Matt a new computer.
Yeah, if you want to hear me reference Dua Lipa in the context of Hakeem Jeffries'
there you go.
outreach to corporate Democrats.
Folks, but we're going to go over these conversations and then we'll be right back. All right, well, we're here to talk about one of my favorite things, which is Southern socialism. And I'm very excited to be joined by our guest, Kelsea. Kelsea, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, y'all. My name is Kelsea Bond. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm running for Atlanta City Council District 2.
Well, it's really exciting, and, it's really important, I think, to kind of continue on the momentum after the Mamdani campaign. And I'm just curious about, for people who might not be as familiar with Atlanta, what are the major issues, and specifically what got you into running here?
Sure. So I've been an organizer on the ground in Atlanta for over 5 years now. I joined during the COVID-19 pandemic, shortly after Bernie dropped out of the race and Black Lives Matter protests exploded across the country. And I kind of had this realization how all these issues intersect, and an understanding that I had to get involved on the day-to-day level in order to change the society that we live in and take our country in a new trajectory. And so I have been a labor organizer in Atlanta for several years, been an active member of the Democratic Socialists of America. And, we've seen so many different fights in Atlanta over these last few years, including Stop Cop City, the fight to build light rail on the Beltline in Atlanta. We've seen an unprecedented amount of lack of respect for democracy in Atlanta politics. And I think this has really fired up the progressive left to, elect people who are ready to fight the status quo, refuse corporate money, and, find a new way to do politics in Atlanta.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm curious, to hear your thoughts on this, because Atlanta has been a kind of like national news story with its, grassroots organizing, particularly in the fight around Cop City, right, which is a very important fight, obviously. But there's been a lot of really exciting things happening on the political front, right, with getting candidates elected, correct?
Yeah, so this last November, our DSA chapter had our first success electing Gabriel Sanchez to the Georgia State House District 42. He will be the first DSA endorsed elected in the state legislature. Technically, you could argue Julian Bond was the first socialist in the state legislature back in the day. But this was a big victory for us. It was an entirely grassroots campaign. He also refused corporate money. We beat a 7-year incumbent who took loads of corporate money. We were outraised, I think, ×2, but we ended up knocking 17,000 doors up in Smyrna, Cobb County, Georgia, which is historically one of the more red-leaning suburbs of Atlanta. And there's been demographic change in recent years, and we just tapped into that and talked to people about the issues that mattered to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very exciting kind of watching what's been happening in Georgia and across the South. And I'm curious on that. I mean, that's not your stump speech. What are you talking to when you're talking to folks about?
Yeah, so I'm running in District 2, which is the smallest, densest district in Atlanta. It's half renter. It's very young, very progressive district. A lot of people there signed the petition to put Cop City on the ballot. And rent in Atlanta has increased so much these last few years. Since 2019, rent has increased 36%, and it's even worse for homeowners. The cost of purchasing a home has gone up more 60-70%. And so, this is pushing people out of the district, this is pushing people out of Atlanta, and we have seen no meaningful interventions in our city housing policy. And obviously we do have preemptions on the state level. We're in a red state, which makes it all the more challenging. So we are largely talking about the cost of housing on doors, but also expanding public transit because Atlanta is such a car-dependent city. Every year we see new levels of record heat. I don't call it hot Atlanta. Natives don't call it that, but it's extremely hot and it's unsustainable. And we're running on winning a Green New Deal for Atlanta, and a different way of operating.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because I'd like to sort of take the Green New Deal down from like the slogan to like what that really means.
Yeah. So Atlanta is a city with a huge amount of sprawl, right? And we have, antiquated zoning laws, which make it hard to build anything but single family homes, which is really on an environmental level and an affordability level unsustainable, right? Atlanta's not walkable. Compared to a city like Chicago or New York, half our streets don't even have sidewalks. So in practice, Green New Deal for Atlanta means planning our neighborhoods with intention so that they're walkable, bikeable, transit friendly, and that we have the housing density to actually support transit expansion, which has been, a real inhibition to us doing that because Metro Atlanta has so much sprawl.
And I'm curious, and forgive me if this is kind of a non sequitur, but I know like in Texas, one of the things that's been very difficult when it comes for us to build trains has been like the opposition of like the major airlines. And I'm curious if that's the case in Atlanta. Maybe not so much because Texas is such a sprawling state. So,
I don't know about airlines, but there has in recent years been opposition to plans to building light rail around the walking trail in Atlanta called the Beltline. These plans were meant to start specifically in my district on the east side of the trail. And there's been this kind of astroturfed anti-transit group known as Better Atlanta Transit, which has been coordinating opposition to the rail, spreading a lot of misinformation about it. And it's mostly backed by, businesses and corporations located on the Beltline that are afraid of losing that tourism traffic. I've also heard that Lime Scooter is somewhat involved.
Interesting.
On the lobbying side, but I don't know about airplanes.
Well, on that, I mean, let's talk a little bit about like affordability and like what the working class message is here, right? Because I feel like there really isn't a city in the U.S. that we can talk about that's not going through an affordability crisis. And, I think it's important to, one, be able to talk about the problems, but also help people understand like what is kind of possible in politics because cities feel very limited in being able to deal with a lot of these things. Yeah.
It's hard without federal intervention, and we're certainly not going to see federal money towards affordable housing these next 4 years. So it is difficult, but the mayor has spoken to solutions like social housing, like community land trusts, and yet we're not acting on any of those solutions. And so, I'm running to actually say, let's try a different way of doing it because it's pretty clear that letting the free market do its thing on housing is just not providing the housing we need for actually low-income Atlantans.
Well, we're here at the DSA convention, and I want to talk a little bit about, your relationship with DSA, and talk about your relationship with DSA, and then maybe for people who are watching this who don't know DSA, are unaffiliated, why this organization is so important for getting these kind of policy goals in place.
So DSA is the largest socialist organization in the country. There's chapters, I think, in nearly every state, and so I'm actually the former co-chair of the Atlanta chapter. I was co-chair for around 4 years. Very involved in our electoral and labor organizing, and really, building the chapter's relationships with local unions like Starbucks Workers United, the Teamsters, the Painters Union, etc. And I think our local chapter has around 1,000 members, and so we played a very big role in electing Gabriel Sanchez to the Georgia State House last fall. And, our way of organizing elections is so hugely different from the way that the Democratic Party establishment organizes elections. We don't take corporate money. We rely on solely small dollar grassroots fundraising. And, we have members who really care about, charting a new political path forward, shaping our society and our government. And so, our campaigns, mine and Gabriel Sanchez's relied on, grassroots volunteers who came out and knocked doors every weekend, knocking tens of thousands of doors, meeting voters where they're really at, pulling those people into the democratic process who feel disillusioned with our political system. And, we kind of have this understanding, to change our political system and to beat this corporate establishment and corporate politics, we need regular working people involved in the fight, in the hundreds and the thousands and eventually the millions. So,
well, on that, I'm curious, as a politician, somebody running for office, I'd be curious in your general thoughts on this too, if you have any. But what's the relationship between kind of a movement politician and the movement, right? And how functionally can we kind of set up those kind of strong connections?
Yeah, that is a great. So we are kind of experimenting with this right now in Atlanta DSA, because Gabriel is our first, endorsed elected official who won. So we have a Socialist in Office committee that kind of manages that relationship between him and the chapter, making sure that we have an open line of communication, that we're making decisions together on, priorities, how to vote. And, the way that DSA elected officials operate differently from the average politician is that we have these deep connections to the movement, and not just to DSA, but other community organizations as well, to labor unions. I'm a former union member. And so, I have been kind of communicating with not just DSA, but other organizations I've worked with in Atlanta that, I want to run as a movement candidate who's uplifting these movement demands, who's working alongside the community and even acting as this kind of voice for the organizing that's happening on the ground, because I understand that I will not have any power in City Hall without active coordination with these people who are actually doing the work in the community, on the shop floor, and making sure that we are, not isolating ourselves from what's actually happening in the movement.
Yeah, and I also would just add that I think one of the things that can be really helpful too is when you're in power, when you're somebody who's privy to things that other people aren't as privy to, being able to kind of share information and insight about who are the power players, not just in sense of the ones that folks know, but who ends up having influence, how things get done, that kind of behind the scenes thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and on a personal level, I've lived in Atlanta my whole life, and I've been disappointed by progressives who got elected to local office. And so the way that I'm running my campaign is shaped by watching others do it and fail, honestly. And, having this analysis of they were not backed by the movement. And so it's really easy when you get in there to, receive peer pressure from your peers, from donors. And so what DSA is really trying to do is build this independent political establishment that is truly independent and not reliant on these same donors and on these same, elite peer connections that are pressuring people to make these bad decisions in office ultimately.
No, I think that's really important. Well, in the last couple of minutes, broadening out a little bit, we're both Southerners, and we both are sort of contending with difficult political situations, at least on the state and now the national level. How can a lot of times people feel very disillusioned with politics? They feel particularly local and city is just well, what can we do? The state governments are honestly throwing out the books, kind of, pushing into the gray area of the law sometimes, on purpose, sometimes just because they're feel very emboldened. How can we, people who are living in quote unquote red states or in the South, kind of think about, local citywide politics as a way to affect change when it seems like the deck is so stacked against working class politics? Yeah,
I mean, something that's been, again, having lived in a red state my whole life, it's really easy to feel like there's no way out of this, right? And I think, there certainly a segment of the population that's just waiting for Georgia to flip blue. And of course, I hope that happens too, right? I would like to gain my abortion rights back, right? But at the same time, we can't just rely on that. And when I've talked to people who work in politics, who are already politicians, I think there's this tendency on the municipal level to just throw your hands up and say, well, this is preempted at the state level. There's nothing we can do about it. This is out of our hands. This is a job for the county or the state. And I think we are leaving a lot of power on the table when we do that. And, we are elected to serve the interests of working people who got us elected. And, there's been, that's why I think DSA is interested in building power specifically, and not just rely on reforms and legislation when we're in there, but actually building that political power on the outside, so that we can, really push back on these Republican bullies, these corporate bullies who are pulling all the strings in Atlanta right now. Because, Cop City was an active collaboration between the mayor of Atlanta and Brian Kemp. And so when they say, oh, our hands are tied, the Republicans, aren't allowing us to do our jobs, it's like, no, it's active collaboration because, these corporate Democrats in Atlanta, they have the same exact donors as Brian Kemp and the Georgia State Republicans. And so one thing running for municipal office has really taught me is how similar these, people really are. They're operating in the same class, right? And the more that you zoom in on local politics, it's very hard to tell Republicans and Democrats apart, which is, again, why, I think it's so important for groups like DSA to chart our own political path, refuse corporate donations, and completely, build political independence from these systems that have made the Atlanta way operate the way it has. Well,
the last thing I want to ask you before we go, you're from Atlanta, and Atlanta, like a lot of other places in the South, right, we're experiencing these like massive population booms and shifts, right? And a lot of times when they talk about, oh, these states are going to go blue, it's always sort of like, oh, well, all of these like Northerners or people from California are moving out there, they're going to change the politics. How do you think about that? And also, what do you think is the importance, if there is any, in being rooted in like a political or historical tradition?
Yeah, I think it's really dangerous on the one hand to assume Georgia will flip blue. And, the Democrats have been taking working class voters, black voters for granted for decades without really talking about the issues that matter to the working class. And we've seen this in, shifts in voting patterns. And so, again, this is why we have to really meet voters where they're at, talk about economic issues that are really being ignored by the Democratic Party, and, bringing people into the democratic process when we do get elected so they feel heard and they feel like their representatives are actually standing up for them. And so, we're going to have to work really hard to regain those votes in Georgia, and, go out of our way to do so. And so, the Democrats' assumption that we're destined to flip Georgia blue is just...
No, I think it frankly is really dangerous. And I think I think Georgia's a good example of this. Texas is a horrendous example of this. Where for decades now they've just been sort of hoping that the population changes were going to win, and it's worse now.
It's getting worse, not better. So we change.
Well, I think that this campaign's really exciting, and hopefully we'll be able to make it better. Thank you so much for joining us. And how can people keep up with the campaign?
So you can check out my website, KelseyBond.com. It's spelled KelseaBond.com. Very active on Instagram, of course. All the donations we can get, the better. And if you have friends in Atlanta who live in the Midtown area, tell them to vote Kelsea Bond this November.
Oh, see. Well, thank you very much, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Welcome back, friends. David here, and I'm really excited to be joined by Ella and Cerena. Could y'all introduce yourself? Tell folks where you're from.
Would love to. Thank you so much for having us. It's very exciting. My name's Ella Teevan. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm here at the convention, and I'm a member of the Bread and Roses Caucus. Really excited to be here.
Hi, my name is Cerena. I am also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I am part of the Houston DSA chapter for all the Texans watching. And I am also a rank-and-file union nurse who is also organizing with Bread and Roses.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really thrilled to talk to both of y'all because you guys have a very strong perspective about what we need to do. And maybe to start us off, y'all have been engaged in politics for a while now. And, we've sort of gone through some ebbs and flows with the larger progressive movement and also like the Democratic Socialist movement. And the past few months have been exciting. Obviously, it's our own campaign. Everyone's very, mobilized and excited around that. But, what do we need to do with this movement to kind of like seize the moment and take on the far right?
That's the question. So I think you're absolutely right about your analysis of the moment. Zoran is really exciting. Also, it's kind of never been scarier to be alive in the United States in some ways. ICE is snatching people off the streets, and that's not just immigrants and the plight of immigrants, which of course we care deeply about, but also U.S. citizens. Like, due process is out the window. My trans friends' rights are under attack. Labor is under attack. Little girls are drowning in floods in Texas, and I think we shouldn't make a mistake about it. This is directly an attack on the power of labor and the labor movement. It's not just a culture war thing. And meanwhile, the Democratic Party would rather attack Zoran Mamdani than put up any meaningful opposition to the Republicans. And so that's where DSA comes in.
Yeah.
It is our job to be publicly, visibly out in the world, in the media, reaching those people who are disillusioned with the Democrats and the Republicans, who are scared for their neighbors, for their families, for themselves. And it matters that we reach them with the message of socialism, because nothing else is going to stop capital, stop climate change, stop these attacks. And so I think our task is to be very visible and grow the organization, because these street protests are really, really exciting, but without organization, they're probably just going to fizzle out. And so it's our job to catch these folks and build a broad, multiracial working class movement.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I think what we're doing in Houston specifically is a perfect example of how DSA can lead in this current political moment. So we currently have an immigrant justice campaign in Houston DSA where we've been collecting petition signatures. I think we've reached almost 1,000. But broadly speaking, we have 5 demands, all of them basically asking Mayor Whitmire and City Council to stop collaborating with ICE, and this has followed news reports of HPD working with ICE to pick up migrants during traffic stops. There was an incident where a woman reporting an instance of domestic abuse was picked up by ICE, and it's very transparent that there is collusion, but City Council and Mayor has refused to acknowledge it. And I think it was about 2 weeks ago where we used the lists that we built through canvassing, text banked, phone banked, turned them out to City Council. We packed City Hall. We got speakers from across different organizations, specifically migrant rights organizations, a broad coalition inside City Hall and also outside City Hall. And I think that was definitely a show of power that I don't think City Council really expected, or to the extent that they expected the backlash. It probably took them by surprise that there are people organizing, and I think it's notable that DSA is leading in this front.
I think leading, that's an interesting word there, and I think is an important question, because going back to talking about y'all's experience in political organizing, it's great to show up at kind of street actions and things like that. This is another moment where people are showing up and asking questions, what's going on? How do we get people to go from just somebody who's like, all right, I saw a flyer that says there's a march, I want to participate in it because I'm upset with it, and actually being active participants on a regular basis with this movement?
Yeah, so a lot of my sort of canvassing, organizing experience started from the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. I was part of UT Austin YDSA, and I was also a YDSA national leader, around the time that Bernie ran. And this is what we talked about all the time, especially with our Beyond Bernie program, where it's nice and all to like build a list, get contacts, turn them out for things like rallies, turn them out to vote. But what we do, instead of just pure list building, we make hard asks of them to take leadership roles in the organization, start organizing others to their vision, start organizing people into DSA, and get them thinking about, what is my role as an organized socialist in the world? And that's how, I guess, like my lore is. I am now working as a nurse.
Incredible.
I was organized by YDSA. My mentors were really big fighters in the rank and file strategy. This was back when it was like not the most popular thing at all to talk about labor in DSA, but I believed really strongly about socialists like getting their heels into the real working class, and organizing from the bottom up, because that's the only way we can actually achieve a truly democratic socialist society.
100%. If there's anything you want to add?
I think it's another really important question. How do we take people who are fired up and get them engaged in political organization? DSA right now is the only mass membership organization on the left in the U.S. You could count unions. Obviously, some unions are more democratic than others, but even our union density is very low at 10%. And so right now, as we're at, people can sign up for DSA online. They can come to an action. And from there, we tend to be catching a lot of people, and then we bring them into some kind of leadership development program like Cerena was talking about. So I come from East Bay DSA. Shouts out to East Bay in Oakland, California and surrounding area. And we had something called the new member cohort. And what that meant was people would sign up, and every quarter, so like spring and fall and summer, we would have those people come to a couple political education events and then a social. And at the social, there would be tables for all of our different committees and groups where they could sign up for what they were interested in. And so rather than sort of just joining DSA and hopefully eventually coming to something, we actively recruited folks to come do some political education, learn about what is socialism, start to unlearn some of their liberal assumptions. And I think that's what makes us different from essentially any other nonprofit in the U.S. right now, who basically treat their quote-unquote members like lines on a spreadsheet. They might be asked to contribute money every once in a while, but really who makes the decisions is this sort of unelected, professionalized staff. And DSA has over 80,000 paper members. We've got many thousands of active members growing into socialists, and we vote on things in this organization, and it's the members who lead. And that means we are able to avoid the pitfalls of the nonprofits that are just beholden to their donors, and who end up more sort of defending status quo politicians than they do pushing them. We can truly be independent and grow tens of thousands, eventually millions of socialists.
Well, on that question, I mean, the democratic nature of DSA is obviously very important. The development of capacities of members into being leaders is critical. But there's also like leaders in the sense of like elected officials, right? And, the relationships between not just DSA and elected officials, but any kind of, organization and elected officials can sometimes be difficult. And I know, it could be a little bit of a difficult question, but, how are y'all thinking, what should we be doing to try to build those kind of relationships and structures around elected officials when it comes to having a responsibility to membership?
That is, again, such a great and thorny question for the left right now. And I think it's made all the more urgent with the victory of Zoran, who mobilized 50,000 canvassers in New York City. I mean, just truly incredible, and is building a movement, which is what we want to use elections to do. We don't just want to win and then pass policies. We especially, I think, in Bread and Roses inside DSA, see elections as a way to agitate for socialist politics, to direct media attention and resources towards labor struggles, having elected officials out on the picket line. But yeah, how do we hold them accountable once they're elected? I'm not sure we have one clear answer, and so it really matters what it means to be endorsed by DSA. That's why we don't really do paper endorsements in many chapters.
And could you explain that for folks who don't know what that means?
Sure. So you probably get mailers around election season where you'll have the candidate's face and then all of the endorsing organizations, and it might be a handful of unions or nonprofits, and that endorsement means they get to use the logo, and maybe they gave them some money, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything about the ongoing relationship between that organization and the elected official. In DSA, we want our electeds to be DSA members and be democratically accountable to the will of the organization. But of course, it's easier said than done. If you look at political figures who sort of end up being the stand-ins for DSA nationally, often it'll be someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Is she primarily accountable to the Democratic Socialists of America? I would say not currently. Are we powerful enough that we could demand that of a politician? I think it depends on how big the race is, but certainly I don't think we're pretending that, DSA as such has the power to make or break a campaign like that in 2025. We would love to get to that point, and I think that's why it matters that we grow. But yeah, I think it's a new model for elections for people to think about, not just that there are enlightened individuals who are going to go in a room and be smart and make policy somewhere, but that a candidate is only powerful because of the movement behind them. And so how we hold them democratically accountable, I think, is a really open question in DSA. Ideally, there would be some kind of agreement that they made with our leadership locally or nationally about things like positions. But I think we really need to experiment with that. And I've seen really exciting experiments across the country. I mean, NYC DSA is sort of the most high-profile one, but I'm in Seattle DSA right now, and we work with Sean Scott, who's in the state legislature, and he meets with us every week, and we talk about policy. And he really sees himself as a DSA member.
100%. Yeah. So, I mean, how can our kind of political movements and organizations think and relate to these elected officials that are coming out of our movement, right, in a way that, allows them to function and operate in the way that they might need to as politicians, but also make sure that they're members and acting out the wishes of the people who are getting them elected?
Yeah, so speaking on accountability, I think there's an element to that that is rooted in trust. And I think building that trust requires a lot of time. And I think with cadre candidates like Zoran and Rashida, I think it's
just really quick, could you explain what cadre candidate means for somebody who might not know?
Yeah, someone who is by and from DSA organized, DSA member, active in the democratic decisions that we make in the organization. And I think those candidates who have grown from DSA do have that really important element of trust. And I think we talk a lot about probably the negative sides about how do we respond if or when an unelected votes in a really crappy way. But I tend to focus more on the positive side, asking questions about how do we develop our membership into thinking about being not just organizers, but also potentially leaders, seeing work and basically organizing working people in our membership to think of themselves as the primary agents of change. And sometimes that might take the form of running for elected leadership. And I think Zoran Mamdani is definitely an example of how this could be possible and how successful it could be, especially in terms of just galvanizing more and more radicalized folks into thinking about, hey, I probably need to get organized in order to get the stuff that I want to see in the world done. And this in itself creates a mass movement that we do need to defeat capitalism. And clearly, with the way that the Democratic Party and the rest of the capitalist establishment sees not just him as a threat, but the entire movement that built him as a threat.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. There's a lot more to discuss, but I know that you'll have some responsibilities you got to get to. Before I let y'all go, could you tell people how they can get involved? And also, just really quick, because some of our audience are fairly young, could you tell them about YDSA if they don't know about this?
Yeah, so YDSA is the Young Democratic Socialists of America. It is the youth wing of DSA, where we do have chapters across universities and some high schools. And I don't know the website off the top of my head, but you should Google it if you don't have a chapter in your university. or you should join your university's YSA chapter. This is a great way to get involved in DSA, start thinking politically, and start engaging in the world as a socialist organizer and do something real in the world. And who knows, maybe you'll be a lifelong socialist organizer after the fact.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, thank you all both so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Yes, folks, that was recorded at the DSA convention, and since then, both Ella and Cerena are now on the NPC of DSA. So looking forward to hearing more from them in the near future.
I'm most sad to be through all the DSA interviews. It was nice to have on
I guess we did we didn't hoard them,
No.
but I think it is one of I think that's something we're going to do more of. And again, audio there, for example, wasn't perfect, but we did a pretty damn good job for our first go of it, I will say. And definitely we want to be trying to do a little bit more of that in the near future. It's really great being able to speak to people all over the world like we are on this program. But it's even better, frankly, to sit down next to folks. So really appreciate it.
And we wouldn't be able to do it without people who support us monthly over at patreon.com/leftreckoning.
There you go, man. That's professional.
Yeah.
No, seriously, all of y'all throughout these years, it means a lot to us. And it's nice to, to be talking to folks who, we've been, we've known virtually for many, many years. So it's all about connection, friends, and I think that's a big part of our movement in the next few years that we really need to be focusing on, is like how to build those connections that can survive the ups and downs of American politics.
It was so interesting to meet all the organizers too, and they all the deliberations and business being conducted there. Fascinating to see, to be able to see as. It's not, DSA members, but also as media. It's cool to be able to do that. I, hope to be back next year.
100%. Well, 2 years, right? But
2 years, right.
We're going to talk a little about this Texas thing, but before we get there, I did want to kind of, take a little stab at the question that is the title here, because it's something that's important to me in my work. And we can expand this to, the Midwest or, quote unquote red states, which is a term we don't like as much. But, can socialism win in the South? Can socialism win in Texas? Can socialism win in North Dakota? I mean, I'll say for Texas in particular, like we actually have a very strong political tradition and socialist tradition in this state. I'm writing a book about it. Funnily enough, a lot of those socialists in Texas got up in their cars after they were being messed up and persecuted in Texas, and they drove up to a place where Matt would be born, almost 100 years later in North Dakota, right? These are two places that you might not expect to have these kind of radical traditions, and they do. Just like across the South, a lot of people are very familiar, with the book Hammer and Hoe in Alabama. But I think a case that folks should be even more familiar with is like the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which was a very powerful and influential union that not only was organizing poor people, but they were organizing people for the sole purpose of protecting them, which meant that the Southern Tenant Farmers Union is probably one of the only unions in American history that encouraged their members to find a different job, right? These were like real class-oriented and class-based organizations that have existed throughout the South. In Louisiana, the Brotherhood of the Timber Workers was one of the first unions, interracial unions in the country. And it defied both law and custom to organize blacks and whites in the same union. In fact, it didn't just stop there. It also encouraged the wives of union members to join the union, giving them equal say and the right to vote. And when asked why they would do that, one of the organizers said, well, if we go on strike, it affects the entire family as well, right? These were radical, interesting unions. This is in the 1910s. Just doing things, pushing back against, reactionary right-wing parts of American history against tremendous danger and in incredibly difficult circumstances, right? And that is your political tradition if you're a Southerner, right? It goes deeper than that. There's plenty of examples. We always encourage people to go and look into your political history, your socialist history in the region that you live in, because I promise you that there will be way more than you ever thought possible. And just today, really quick, the South is a region that is one, we're going to be talking about in a little bit, heavily gerrymandered. Political expression is limited. In states like Georgia, in states like Texas, you are seeing Republicans try to do everything that they possibly can to not only try to stack the deck in their favor, but to limit the ability of elected officials to be able to pursue their mandates. We talked about this a little bit with Kelsey. In Texas, we're having the same kind of crisis where we have what's called the Death Star bill, which is used to limit cities like Austin, Houston, the major cities from being able to pursue their own kind of policies when it comes to basic things like water breaks. That's how nasty and disgusting the Republican Party is, that they're trying to push against that, right? But in the face of all of this, you continue to see a kind of fearlessness and an unrelentingness of Southern people who do believe that a better world is possible. And what our role historically as socialists is to try to capture, I think, that kind of innate political and social tradition that we have in this region of the country. I mean, I'm somebody who grew up very, very poor in both Texas and in South Carolina. And some of the most impactful moments on my political life were, one, when I first started working in concrete, and I was a young kid, and my boss was trying to force me to pay for materials that I needed to use to do that job out of my own pocket. And a bunch of other coworkers who barely knew me, and I was definitely getting paid less than everybody like that, and might have been seen as a threat to them because I was kind of undercutting their wages. Instead of coming at me or seeing me get abused like that, these people took me under their wing, and they went up and they told the boss that they will refuse to work on any more jobs until the boss commits to saying that he won't make this young kid, David, pay for his equipment, right? That was an impactful moment for me. And also, growing up poor in the South, this, is that when things are tough, and things oftentimes are tough, that your neighbors will be out there to look out for you. And I think that that's a kind of solidarity that, I don't think is necessarily only exists in the South. I know it exists in many other places, but it's something that I think is a big part of our political and our social tradition. And I think that being able to uphold that mantle and to build political movements that can build articulation of ways that we can sort of have those social values that we have of looking out for your neighbor, standing up against, asshole bosses and things like that. And give it a political articulation through a movement, right? Is the kind of historical task of socialists. And it's exciting to go to a DSA convention and to talk to people, from Atlanta, from the Carolinas, from South Texas, about what it is that they're doing. And even if they're not running massive campaigns for city council, just being able to hear what is it that you're up against, how are you thinking about your communities, all this kind of stuff, I think is going to be absolutely critical, because I do see a very bright future for this political movement, not just in the New York, as exciting as that is, but hopefully all across this country and all across the South.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of emphasis on Zoran and New York being exceptional. And it sort of goes to what you're saying about this history is pretty much everywhere. And the reason for that is because capitalism is everywhere and it has contradictions everywhere. So if North Dakota, right? The farm sort of populism, literally more inflected by socialism than even I knew growing up as someone aware of okay, it's called the Nonpartisan League. Why was that? Well, they decided to run on all parties, but literally there were socialist organizers at the key moments setting that movement up. Same thing with going on in Minnesota. Any place you look, you'll have definitely some sort of populist history, if not explicitly a socialist to Marxist.
100%. So to answer the question is, can socialism win the South? Yes. And we better hope that comes quickly because we sure do need it. Shall we get into the story a little bit here, Matt?
Well, yeah. I saw Barack Obama had a... well, let's play a little bit of this. Yeah, so this is our boy Barry. Let's see. He had some words of encouragement, I guess. It kind of reminds me of when the NBA players were on strike for George Floyd. But anyway, let's. I don't want to bias this. Let's watch.
The group of Texas Democrats fighting redistricting in Texas have support from former President Barack Obama. During a virtual meeting yesterday, the former president spoke to the group and called their efforts inspiring, saying progress is never easy.
We assumed that things would continue to get better, that our democracy would become more inclusive, that it would become more fair, that we'd make it easier for people to vote rather than harder for people to vote, that the votes would be counted rather than suppressed.
Former president also says this is a reminder that democracy requires Americans to fight for it.
Yeah, and for folks who don't know, not all, by the way, but enough House Democrats since then have returned to Texas, re-establishing quorum for the Republicans to put forward these anti-democratic maps that are going to have major consequences for not just Texas but for the rest of the country for a long time to come.
Yeah, and so that's not entirely unanticipated. When you sat down with the state reps last week, you asked that particular question.
And I have this video here. So let's talk about this because we had Representative Rodriguez Ramos on the program and Jean Wu on the program last week, actually. We spoke to them in exile in Chicago about what was going on. And I just want to, set the record straight about what was told to us because some of this was kind of implied here in this clip. So this is me asking the question about how long are these representatives willing to stay outside of the state?
Our commitment for this from the very beginning has been our group has committed to destroying and killing and ending this corrupt special session. A special session that, while they say on its face, they say, well, we're here to protect the people and help the victims of the flooding and prepare for future mitigation. They didn't even file a goddamn bill until the Monday after we left, after we complained about it at a press conference. Then they filed the bill, right? They didn't even have a first hearing on those bills yet. And so, the corruption of this special session is just so much that we had no choice but to destroy it.
But when you really look at the grand scheme of things and you scale this all the way back, shoot, I'm down to stay out until next year.
So yeah, we have this is what was being said there, and Jean Wu, I think, saying that the goal was specifically around this special session. Now, one of the things for people who don't know, like the intricacies of this, the argument was that if they hold out until filing deadlines in November, they could at least kind of push this out of the 2026 elections, right? To sort of run out the clock on these maps. Now, again, probably would be very difficult to hold it out. It probably was the best shot that they had at breaking this down. I could tell you guys some of the background stories and things that I've been hearing about this strategy, if you'd like, Matt, about what was achieved here with the strategy, maybe what wasn't achieved.
Yeah, did they actually get something out of this and that they can really write home about?
So I'm just going to say straight up right here is that I think that the best thing to do, the best way to break this would have been holding out and breaking quorum and not allowing these maps to pass, right? Definitely you can understand how it's difficult. And for people who don't understand, these were representatives who were facing tremendous kind of legal and financial pressure to do this.
And law enforcement, weird stuff about, what are the right wingers going to do? What's Abbott going to do? Is he going to send, is someone from Trump?
Well, frankly, I'm worried that on a national level, that the Trump administration and Kash Patel would sort of start, pushing things outside of state lines. Because the understanding is that, Abbott and the Texas government have no jurisdiction to enforcement activities in Illinois or New York or in California. And there was growing worry that they might see that, which would be a huge overreach. And again, what we're watching right now is an egregious infringement on the basic concept of democracy. We're living in a situation where the Republicans in the state of Texas are saying we want to be able to choose our voters. This is extreme. Texas is already one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. And we're getting this into a situation where just if you use the raw numbers, this is from the Texas Tribune. If you use the raw numbers from the 2024 election, Trump wins Texas with 56% of the vote, right? Solidly Republican, but 56% of the vote. The old maps that we have in Texas right now would have given Trump a 71% victory, right? That's as if they tallied it based on these congressional districts. So already a huge advantage here. The ones that they're trying to push now, we would see 79% victory for Trump if those were the districts that were being utilized to tally the statewide vote for Trump, right? So these are districts that are drawn in such a way that even using this kind of statewide metric that we have give Republicans tremendous advantage, right? This is clearly an anti-democracy movement. Now, what was achieved, you can argue, and this is what the House Democrats have done, that this has drawn national attention. Now, before they came back, the House Democrats started saying that two things were going to happen. One, that the special session was going to die. That was already scheduled to happen. So they were saying that they did it, already scheduled to happen. And two, that California was going to push forward these redistricting, this redistricting push. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Now, again, those conversations happened way before the quorum break on the California side. So two things that were already happening was kind of called as a victory. Now we can get into some of the kind of secondary arguments, the arguments that I would get from folks, which is that one, it drew national attention to this. I think that's undeniably true. I don't think people would have been talking about this had the House done nothing and allowed the Republicans to push it through originally. We would not be having this national conversation about it. It would have been a news story, a weak story, and that would have been it. So I think that's true. Now, is that enough? The other argument is that this has given Texas Democrats and lawyers in general the opportunity to build up a legal fight to push back against these undemocratic maps in Texas. Right, that this gave them extra time to sort of prepare their legal challenge. And there's already preparation basically in the original lawsuit against the 2021 maps that were so egregious to basically include these maps with the assumption now that they're going to pass. Now, again, there are still people who did not return because they have argued that breaking quorum is the best tool that they have to fight these maps. And frankly, I agree with that. I think that it would have been difficult. I understand why there's some hesitation about, when we first covered on this program, I said, if they can hold out to November, they can do this. I think that that's probably unlikely because I know that, maintaining that kind of discipline against the House caucus, the House Democratic caucus, is difficult. Now, I don't know this exactly. These are things that BRB have been whispered to me, so take that with what you will. I don't have any reporting on this. This is just what I'm being told by people whose opinion I trust and who are involved in these kind of things. Is that there's probably going to be some folks who are going to break. And what was going to happen was the story was going to be, look, these Democrats came back to Texas, and now the Republicans are pushing the map, and the Democrats look weak and disorganized. So by doing it in this way, it's like, look how strong we are. We're claiming a victory, and we're pushing back and making this fight. Again, I don't have firm reporting on that. That's just a hunch, conversation, whispers that I've heard. I think that's probably not unlikely. That doesn't seem impossible for me to imagine that this was probably a very successful move to try to prevent a more damaging story of certain Democrats falling.
A failure.
But
I mean, that's the thing is, like, I guess, is it better to put sort of lipstick on the pig a little bit?
Yeah.
Or would it be better to confront the loss in its entirety and the stakes of maybe what this is setting off in terms of, I agree with you. I'm skeptical of it. I'm concerned. I hope you're right. And like, when I just get worried.
I hope I'm right about what?
I hope you're right I hope the people that are saying we want to do this to give the lawyers raw material to work with in court. I hope that's correct.
I think that's
intrinsically don't trust that stuff.
I think that's called cope, frankly. Look, and again, like we interviewed Wu and Rodriguez Ramos because I have tremendous respect for what they did. I think that they're in a difficult position. People like Texas Democrats are in a complete minority. They have no ability to prevent these maps. Using they can't vote their way out of this, right? This is something we're using these kind of extreme measures measures to protect democracy, they have to take these things. That's why we interviewed them, because we wanted to hear this, their story and their perspective on it. But I do think that, it's also, we have a responsibility to kind of share what we're hearing. That's my first and foremost responsibility, is to my listeners, the people who trust us. And look, I think that this is a difficult situation, and I think that you can claim that it's undeniable that like the national tension that was drawn from this is definitely helpful for pushing against this anti-democratic move by the Republican Party. I do think that if you don't break quorum, this happens, that we're not even really having conversations about this. Certainly not on at the scale that we were. Now, again, I do think that like had there been enough discipline to hold out, we would be having a different conversation. But again, I get it; it's tough. But that's the reality. We're up against a movement that is willing to kind of push the boundaries of and the very foundations of our democracy in ways that are extremely dangerous. And we talked about this a lot last week, so I'm not going to get into all of it. But like what we're already seeing in Texas is the intended consequences of these maps, right? The nastiness that we saw from Lloyd Doggett directed towards Greg Casar, as they're going to be set up in what looks like it'll be a very expensive, very ugly primary here, that not only is going to cause a lot of division against the opposition movement to Trump and Greg Abbott and these things, but it's also going to mean that that movement will be down a seat, as they will be down multiple seats across the state of Texas going into the midterms. This is a very fundamental fight. It's a fight for democracy. Do you see here? I think you can pull it up, Matt. I have it for you if you want to. But Representative Nicole Collier is being held right now in the Texas House. She has been unable to move. You can make it larger here. There's a live stream. Y'all can watch this. She's being held. She's been held there since Monday because when these representatives came back, they were required by Dustin Burrows, Republican, the author of the Death Star bill, if people listen to me talk about that, to have a police escort and surveillance until tomorrow. She has refused to kind of sign herself over to that jurisdiction, and because of that, it's being held and has been held in the Texas House. This is an egregious way to treat your colleagues, right? What we are seeing from this to the abuse that people like Gene Wu have faced, from some of the nasty, racist, and vile comments that he's faced from Republican senators, to this, we are seeing the insult to all of us as voters in this state, as these people are trying to take away our basic democratic rights. This is a critical moment and a fight for democracy that we really need to take seriously, right? This is not just a normal, the Republicans are doing something nasty and ugly again. This is setting us up for a situation where in the state of Texas, we do not have the basic democratic rights to be able to select our representatives. The maps that they are drawing are absolutely egregious. I can share this with y'all. This is what the map of Texas congressional districts would look like. Again, specifically in Austin, in my area, which has Lloyd Doggett and Casar completely eradicated. San Antonio, similar story. Houston, similar story. Dallas, ridiculous. We are seeing a moment where people in these areas, which have overwhelmingly been voting Democrat for decades now, will not have the representation in Congress. And not only do you not have a voice, you also just lose having somebody who's out there to protect you. Because if you are like the Republican who's representing Austin, right, in this way, I don't have this up for y'all, representing one of these kind of fake things where they're just kind of entering into the area of Austin, do you think that their first and foremost priority is going to be looking out for Austinites? Same thing with San Antonio, right? This is something that goes beyond just our ability to choose our representatives. This is a situation where you're actually going to have somebody who's frankly going to be pretty hostile to you and your community representing you. And that is another extreme slap in the face to Texans and to democracy in this state.
Yeah, and at a certain point, I think you are
Yeah, well, hold on. I guess we're having a little bit of a tech issue here. Matt, you were saying?
Yeah, at a certain point, I think you do need to call their bluff. And just to bring this sort of full circle, this is Mark Hancock, the union leader in Canada, representing the air workers. And he basically said, are you really going to throw me in jail over this?
Mm-hmm.
There's no limit. We're going to stay strong. We're going to stay committed to making sure that those workers can do the job that they love doing and actually be able to afford a roof over their heads, to afford caring for their families. And if it means folks like me going to jail, then so be it. If it means our union being fined, then so be it. We're looking for a solution here. Our members want a solution here, but that solution has to be found at a bargaining table.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just the era of politics we're entering, where things are very real. Like,
yeah.
I mean, even Chris Van Halen going down to see Kilmar Abrego Garcia at CCOT, like that was actually an important exercise of power there. Like being willing to do that. You know, when we talked about this is a difference in just the electorate now, particularly on the Democrat side, compared to 2016, 2017, when they're like, well, find a way to work with Republicans in a bipartisan fashion. There is a desire to fight. And so now it's like, how do we actually fight? And you know, like you said, like hopefully there is some ability to slow this down legally, but
yeah,
you know.
but I think there's an acceptance that this is going to happen. I think that's basically what we've seen here. And sorry, it's like there's no way to kind of sugarcoat it, and like, you know, just to be abundantly clear, it's like I have respect for the tactic. I wish it worked. It doesn't seem like it's going to. Hey, maybe I'm wrong, and this legal challenge is going to be really, really powerful. I just have my doubts, frankly, after seeing what we've seen in the course for the past years. Now, hopefully this will be an encouragement for people to continue fighting, you know, and, you know, maybe some of the folks who were pushing about, you know, returning, we get some of those names and some information about that so people can make some electoral decisions in the near future, because this is a generational fight and the stakes are just too high. You know, to be making excuses, which is why I'm kind of hot and mad about it. And I think that the way that people have kind of responded to the willingness of Democrats to fight back against the Republicans, hopefully has shot a message or made something clear to some folks in that party about how important that might be for them, just on a selfish careerist level, about what could maybe be achieved by a willingness to fight and to push back against Trump and the far right, because you can see that people are starved for it after watching all of this hard this time, the last time, and hell, frankly, under Biden as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting I mean, even Obama seemed a little bit more concerned than he usually is willing to let on. It'd be nice if he was doing something besides telling people to shut up and play ball, but you know.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is. Well, folks, you know what? We got plenty more, and I'm sure people have some questions for us, but we're going to go over to the post game, patreon.com/leftreckoning. We appreciate all of the support. It was really great being able to speak to Kelsey, to Ella, and to Cerena about all of the work that they're doing. There's links for people to follow it and keep up with all of that below. We're only able to do those things in person because of the support that y'all give us. And you can support us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. It's just $5 to help us keep the lights on. If you know, that's too much for you and you want to, you know, figure something else out, feel free to email us. We always are happy to make something that works out for you as well. leftreckoning@gmail for all of that. But yeah, we're going to go over the post game. We're going to be right over there in just a second. You get access to that. I know there's already people who are watching. So if you're watching on the free side and you want to get over there, I'd jump over now. We'll take a couple questions, talk a little bit more about this, and talk about an exciting new political and media project. Right, Matt?
Exactly. I got some more articles. Well, frankly, if there's some Matt Brunig or Mike Conzel, the argument, I can't wait. A bunch of abundance bloggers and Mike Conzel and Matt Brunig.
Yeah.
We'll
be talking about that much more over there. So come over and join us.